Hey guys, and welcome to the video. Today we are going to be diving a little deeper into Kubernetes. More specifically, we will be creating a K8s cluster on my home server. Currently, I have my home server running Harvester version 1.0. I'm sure some of you have heard of Rancher and its parent company SUSE, while Harvester was created and is maintained by SUSE. SUSE offers a variety of open source enterprise grade tools including Rancher, Longhorn, Fleet, and the ever-growing K8s architecture. Nowadays, Kubernetes is considered the standard platform for hosting apps and websites. With the introduction of Docker, we can now containerize applications or microservices and manage those containers with Kubernetes. I had a previous video called Learning Kubernetes for Free Part 1 that explains the basics of Kubernetes, and it has some very nice visuals to help you grasp the underlying idea. This video can be considered a part 2 of that series since I'll be actually creating a cluster running some apps on Kubernetes. Getting all of that out of the way, I think it's time we jump in and take a look at Harvester. Before we do that, however, make sure to subscribe if you have not already, and hit the notification icon to get notified whenever I post a video. Okay, let's jump in. So here we can see the Harvester front end or GUI running in my browser. If you've ever used Proxmox, Hyper-V, or ESXi, think of Harvester as a stripped-down version of that. The main focus of Harvester is to run Kubernetes and to connect seamlessly to Rancher, so the concept is relatively simple. Harvester can be considered the cloud provider that Rancher deploys Kubernetes to, except of course Harvester is not a cloud. In this case, it's my home server. In order to start a Rancher Kubernetes cluster, we need a Rancher virtual machine to be the front end for Rancher, of course. So let's go ahead and walk through creating a Rancher virtual machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to virtual machines. And as you can see, I already have a Rancher host running here. I created it earlier, but we're going to go through and create a new one. I'm going to hit create at the top. So before you do this, you should have uploaded the ISO image of Ubuntu. That's what I'm going to be using to run the front end of Rancher. If you did not upload it, you can actually come over here. I should have done this first. You can come over here to images and you just simply hit create, and then you'll be able to upload your image here. You could upload it from a file or from a URL. So I already have that all set up. So let's go back to virtual machines, create. And we're going to name this Rancher Demo. And I'm going to allocate 4 CPU and 4 gigs of RAM. I'm going to use my default SSH key that I previously uploaded. You can upload those under SSH keys over here. I found that Rancher needs at least 4 gigs of RAM to run without crashing, so keep that in mind. Then we're going to go over here to volumes. And this is where you're going to set up your boot volume and also your CD-ROM volume to boot off of. So first thing, we're going to want to select the image that we want to install. And I'm going to use full 2004. I have tried Linux Ubuntu 20.10 and it doesn't seem to work for Rancher. I don't really know what's up with that. So we're going to use 2004 first. What you're going to want to do is you're going to change this to CD-ROM. And then we're going to add another volume, and this is going to be the boot volume. We don't really need to change anything here. So let's go to networks. So I set up my second network called DHCP because I want to grab an IP from DHCP. So I'm going to choose that. You don't really have to change anything else. We're going to go down to node scheduling. Now if you have more than one node or more than one Harvester VM running, then you can schedule it to a specific node. Right now, I'm just running Harvester on my home server, and I only have one, so we're going to go to Advanced Options, and this is pretty much all you need to do. You don't need to change anything here. We're going to go ahead and hit Create, and we can see it's getting ready to start right here. So let's give it a sec, and we'll let it start up. And as we could see, after about 40 seconds, it's ready to go. So let's go ahead and click on this, and we're going to open in Web VNC. And what you're going to see is just basically, the Ubuntu startup installation wizard. We're going to go through it real quick. And here's the beginning of the wizard, so let's run through it real quick. And I'm going to show you that if we go here, we can see DHCP is grabbing that IP of 10.0.0.18. That's because we picked the default DHCP network at the beginning. Let's hit done. And we're going to want to install OpenSSH. You don't have to install it if you want to always use the web VNC to access your server, but I want to use my SSH client, so we're going to go hit yes. And I'm not going to install anything else, and we're going to let that run through. So here's my running Rancher host. So first thing what we want to do is we want to update it. So let's do that real quick. And everything looks updated. So what we're going to do next is we're going to install Docker. I usually use this script right here. You can use whatever you want. Just make sure that it is a supported version of Docker. And now we can see that Docker is installed, so let's go ahead and clear this out. And I generally like to reboot the machine after I run all the updates, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. For those of you who are curious, my SSH client is Termius. I like it a lot because I can keep my host over the cloud, and it saves all my keys and hosts, so it's pretty cool. Let's try and reconnect. And let's just go ahead and make sure Docker is running. Oops. Can't type it. Alright, it looks like Docker's running. Now what we're going to do is we're going to install Rancher. So I'm going to copy and paste. And what this is going to do is this is going to run the Rancher container. It's privileged, and port 80 and 443 are going to be exposed so we can hit that front end. Alright, let's go ahead and check if it's up, and it looks like it's up. Now, generally you're going to want to wait about a minute before you hit the web GUI. I'm not sure why that's the case, but we're going to go ahead and wait a minute. And it looks like it's been about a minute, so let's go ahead and hit the dashboard real quick. So looks like we were able to hit it right here. Now I'm going to grab this real quick, and we're going to go back into that terminal. We're going to grab the container ID. And that'll be right here. And then make sure you add sudo beginning of that. I'm going to grab that password, paste it in here, and then that should authorize us. Now I usually have a set password on there, so I'm going to keep it at that. And I don't want anonymous statistics to be sent to Rancher, but you can if you want. So let's hit continue. And now we are in the Rancher front end GUI. It's pretty cool. I usually just clear all the notifications up top. So how are we going to connect Rancher to Harvester, and what exactly is going on when we do that? So what we're going to do first is we're going to go over to virtualization management, and this is how we're going to get Harvester to talk to Rancher. So we're going to have to import existing, so I'm going to name this Harvester, and this is going to give us a URL that we're going to input into Harvester under settings. It's going to be under cluster registration URL. We're going to pop that in there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to Rancher. And we can see it's pending right now. Basically what it's doing is it's going back and forth with Harvester and Rancher, and they're agreeing to connect. Okay, and now that we're all set up with that, it took a little bit to become active, but as you can see, it is now active. So let's go ahead and go back to this tab right here, and we're going to hit default or whatever you named your Harvester cluster. And as we can see, this is exactly what we were looking at inside of Harvester, almost an identical dashboard. So great, now we have Rancher talking to Harvester. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to create a Kubernetes cluster. So let's go ahead back to the Rancher dashboard. We'll go to Home, and we're going to click Create. And we're going to see Harvester right down here. So I'm going to click Harvester. And what we're going to name this is we're going to name this Demo. And the way that Kubernetes works is you're going to have, you can either have one or more etcd and control nodes, and they can also be worker nodes, or you can have one or more etcd and control plane nodes and worker nodes. And the way I usually like to do this is I usually like to have one master node, and that's going to be the etcd and control plane, and I'm going to have one worker node or more. Actually, let's maybe go with 3, and that's going to be the worker. So once we have that all set, we can see down here that we're good to go, but we do need to add a node template. So we're going to come down here, and we are going to have to make a cloud credential for Harvester. So this is basically just kind of a handshake between Harvester and Rancher. So we're going to name this Harvester cred, and it's going to say what type of cloud credential type. It's Harvester, and it's going to ask what cluster, and we're going to pick default here, and we're going to hit create. And so now it's going to be using the Harvester credentials that we just made, and now we can look at our instance options. Now I'm going to be making, this is going to be the worker, the master, so we're going to want 2 CPUs. I'm going to up that to 4, and RAM is good with 4. Since we're going to be using Longhorn, we are going to want to use disk storage because Longhorn uses the storage of the node. But for the master, I'm going to go to 25. We're going to put in the default namespace on Harvester, and let's select the image right here. Now, in order for Rancher to create this cluster, we need a minimal image of Ubuntu. I have minimal 20.04 on here, so we're going to pick that. The network, since we want our nodes to get a IP using DHCP, we're going to pick that DHCP network that we made before. And the SSH username is going to be Ubuntu. In terms of advanced options, we don't really need any of that stuff. Let's look at labels, no taints. And you can edit this stuff if you want, but we're not going to edit that at all. Alright, so let's go ahead and hit create. Now the template that it's going to be listed as right here is cattle global-nt glttj. Not sure what that naming scheme is, but it is what it is. Then we're going to make another template here for worker nodes, and what we're going to do is we're going to do 4 CPU, 4 gigs of RAM. We're going to do 50 for disk default. We're going to use that minimal like we were using before, DHCP. So the only thing we're changing really is the storage size of the disk. And we're going to hit create, and this is the second one. I wish they gave you a chance to name the templates. I'm not sure why they don't. So moving on, let's keep going down here. We're going to look for nothing to member roles. We don't need that. Labels, we don't need that as well. This is the version of Kubernetes that we're installing. So we're going to go with 1.22.7. And then the network provider, I'm going to leave it as Canal. Now if you go down here, you can also connect a private registry here, and there's even more advanced options here as well. If you really want to change these, you can, but it works with default. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit create. And let's wait for this to populate. Let's go ahead and take a look at this inside of Rancher. And as you can see, we're going to look at that provisioning log here. It'll start populating some stuff. But these are the nodes that are being provisioned inside of Harvester. And in fact, if we go over to Harvester, we should be able to see some virtual machines being created right now. And there you go, we have the master and 3 worker nodes all starting right now. And we can see what's going on with those specific nodes once this provisioning log gets started going here. Let's wait a few minutes for that to happen. And I don't see anything going on in this provisioning log, so let's go ahead over here and see what's going on. All right, it looks like on the master they're installing Docker, and it's going to set the Docker configuration as well. So this is moving along. It's just a matter of getting everything installed, and these are running right now. And you can see it grabbed an IP from DHCP. Well, let's go back here and wait for this to finish up and the provisioning log to show some details. And finally, we're getting some action in this provisioning log here. As you can see, it's doing its thing. And we'll have to wait a few more minutes, but let's go back to this. We can see that everything is waiting to register with Kubernetes. So first, we need to get this master node up and running. The control plane and etcd need to be up in order for the worker nodes to register with it. So we're just waiting on this. You can take a look at the provisioning log. And looks like everything is successfully started. They're just running health checks on everything. And we can see here it says building Kubernetes cluster successfully. Now that doesn't mean we're done. Let's go back to the machine pools here. We can see that the master is now completed as the control plane and etcd. So now what we have to do is wait for the worker nodes to register with the master node. And just like that, we have our cluster all set up and ready to go. Looks like it only took 7 minutes to get everything set up. And we can see that our cluster is set up and ready to go. Let's go ahead and click that. Awesome. We can see that everything's still setting up. But this is our new cluster that we just created. Now let's go ahead and let's deploy something. If you haven't been to my GitHub, I have a lot of YAML deployment files for Kubernetes. So let's see if we can find something to deploy. We go down to Kubernetes. What's a simple thing to deploy? Let's go with Uptime Kuma. Uptime Kuma is basically the same thing as Uptime Robot or something similar to that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to deploy it. We're not going to expose it, but what we're going to do is we're going to copy that deployment, and we're going to need a namespace for this. So let's go ahead and create a namespace in the default project, and the namespace is going to be Uptime. I'm going to hit create, and what we're going to do up here is we're going to go to import YAML, and we're going to see what this deployment says. So the deployment is going to deploy to namespace Uptime. There's going to be one replica set, and the app label is going to be Uptime. Now we do need to make a persistent volume claim since it's referenced here in app data, and here's the image that we're pulling from Louis Lam, and it's going to be exposed on port 3001. So first we're going to deploy this, and it's in progress, and then since we need a persistent volume claim and we don't have a storage driver, we're going to deploy we're going to deploy Longhorn, and that's going to be our storage driver for Kubernetes. And we can check on our pods right here. Now obviously uptime is not going to be passing at first because we don't have that persistent volume claim. But we can take a look and see that Longhorn is starting. Just waiting on the health checks. And we can see success. Longhorn is installed. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create that persistent volume claim here. And the persistent volume claim needs to be in the same namespace. So let's do uptime, and then the persistent volume claim is just going to be named uptime. We're only going to need 1 gigabyte. We're going to hit create, and this is going to be pending. And it looks like it's up. Now let's go here to pods, and we're going to see uptime progressing. It's going to be creating, and it looks like it's up. Now we can check the logs, see if there's anything, and there we go. Now, obviously, I didn't import anything, so you'd have to add all your hosts to this uptime dashboard. But I just wanted to demonstrate deploying an app to Kubernetes once we have it installed using Rancher and Harvester. If you want to access, you can download. If you want to access the cluster through the terminal, you can download the kubeconfig file right here, or you could copy it. And I'm not going to give a whole tour on Rancher, but this is basically how you get started by creating a Rancher cluster on Harvester. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up and share it with someone you think it might be helpful for them. Leave a comment down below if you want to see other videos with Harvester. There's lots of different versions of Kubernetes like K8s, and then there's a lot of preview versions of Kubernetes as well that we could test out. But this is basically just a video that goes over how to set up a cluster using Rancher and Harvester. So I hope you found it helpful. Thanks.